We're joined now by Aurel Braun. He's a professor of international relations and political science at the University of Toronto. Great to see you, Professor.
Hi.
This was about an hour-long meeting, their second of this year. I'd like to get your take on it and the timing of it.
Clearly, this was very delicate diplomacy, careful choreography, where China wishes to be supportive, but at the same time, it has to be careful that it does not embolden Russia into getting into adventures that could be very risky, such as an all-out invasion of Ukraine, which would bring about very strong responses from the West. So while they emphasize friendship, and Russia certainly tried to portray this as a kind of partnership of equals, the reality is very different. Russia is a country that has global pretensions. China is an actual global power. So there is an asymmetry in that relationship. They have a congruence of interest in many instances, but at the same time, there are also significant differences that the countries have to take into account.
Security issues with the West, as you mentioned, trade, just some of the issues discussed. What would you consider the biggest takeaway from this meeting?
Vladimir Putin seems to be desperate to get Chinese support. He has had a tremendous amount of pushback from the West. You look even at leaders such as President Emmanuel Macron of France, for years now, has tried to improve relations with Russia. He has now made some of the strongest statements warning Russia about a massive response if Russia should be tempted to launch a widespread attack on Ukraine. And so Russia wants to have Chinese support. We would like to have Chinese protection. But China has been very careful in the past, even though they talk about the warm relations and the cooperation that they have, including on security issues, and the fact that China is saying that Russia should get some security guarantees. It is noteworthy that China has not recognized so far the Russian annexation of Crimea. And that tells us a lot, that there are those differences, that even though the Kremlin might like to play kind of China card, China does not wish to be manipulated by Russia. So they will cooperate, but this notion that this is an equal partnership is not realistic. China is a far bigger, far more successful entity, and Russia tries in every possible way, especially domestically, to portray this as a partnership of equals. Dmitry Rogozin, who used to be deputy prime minister and is now in charge of the space program, talked about in glowing terms that there's going to be a joint lunar landing or lunar station project that Russia and China are going to build, and that this is a partnership of equals. He tried to emphasize that, and perhaps in space there could be a partnership of equals. But geopolitically, Russia needs China far more than Beijing needs Moscow. Beijing is aware of this, and it ought to be aware of the fact just how risky it is to find itself in a position where it may inadvertently embolden Russia into adventures that would cause damage to China's long-term global interests.
Interesting perspective there. We appreciate your time, Professor Aurel Braun. Thank you so much for joining us from Toronto.